Good night. Good night. It's been a long day. Good evening. It is Friday, April 24th. This is Tim Ashe, President of the Vermont State Senate. Thank you for joining me for one of my nightly updates on Vermont's effort to combat the COVID-19 crisis. I hope yesterday you enjoyed my discussion with Peg Gagne, who's the Chief Nursing Officer at the University of Vermont Medical Center. I think Peg in some ways might have more, she might in a supervisory role have more people that she works with who are so-called frontline workers than almost anyone in the whole state because of the size of UVM Medical Center. I was really impressed with the sense of calm that she suggested our nurses brought to this crisis. Obviously, there were weeks leading up to Vermont's first case, and it was, for many of us in the public, it was not yet real. We weren't being asked to change any of our behaviors, but nurses and other medical professionals were already planning for what might come. I also think that the readiness for worst case scenarios gave me some additional appreciation for the amount of stress that nurses and others were under, going to bed each night in the weeks leading up to this crisis, thinking about what their work lives were going to be like. And so Peg was very, very interesting, and I thought it really important that she said the best way to thank a nurse is to follow all of the public health orders and guidance that are coming from our governor and the Commissioner of Health. I will second Peg. I also had my technological glitch the day before. I'm not exactly a tech wizard, but I did have a nice conversation with Governor Phil Scott, really trying to not focus on the day-to-day, updates of the COVID-19 crisis, but rather asking him on a human level what it has been like to have to make all these really difficult decisions, beginning with the state of emergency, closing the schools, closing the childcare facilities, and then each additional constraint that's been put on since. So if you haven't checked out that video, it's on my Facebook page. And if you can't find it, just email me. It's about 30 minutes. I learned some things that I didn't know, even though I talk pretty regularly to the governor. And I think it puts a human side to the challenges of being the state's leader right now. As I've said, I've had my philosophical differences with the governor over the years, especially when I've been in this role and he's been governor. But as far as protecting public health, we have been of one mind through this crisis, and I commend him for the sincerity of each choice he's made. And we might look back and think, well, maybe I could have done this one a little bit different. But in general, I think the public health statistics that we have in Vermont speak volumes, not only to the choices he's made, but also to the compliance or buy-in from members of the public. So check that out if you haven't already, and hopefully you'll enjoy it and learn something about the behind-the-scenes perspective. Want to say there were about 3 new cases today of individuals who have tested positive for COVID-19. This continues a trend of 2 or 3 or 4 a day for about the last week. We're also down to about 40 people who are hospitalized or who are either hospitalized because they've tested positive and their symptoms are very bad, or they're hospitalized but they haven't been tested yet but are suspected to be. That is suspected to be positive. That is down from about 70 at the high point. It was in the mid 70s. And so that's a critical statistic because it is really the basis on whether our hospitals have the capacity to take in the most serious cases. So far, we have not needed to use some of the overflow sites that have been constructed in St. Albans, in Barrie, in Burlington, and Essex, all of which is positive news in an otherwise very challenging landscape. Also want to, before I turn to some of today's news from the governor's modifications of the executive order, just before this, I came from 2 conversations. The first was with Congressman Welsh. He joined a committee that I chair to talk about federal action in support of the states. I want you all to know I used that as an opportunity, as did several of my legislative colleagues, including the Speaker of the House, to say that while we definitely appreciate the advocacy of Congressman Welsh, Senator Sanders, Senator Leahy, the way the federal government has put out resources to help states has been challenging. The way that the unemployment and self-employed and independent contractor benefits have rolled out have been extremely challenging. I don't need to tell many of you that. The small business assistance has lacked guidance. It has been nationally skewed to very large companies. That's not so much a problem in Vermont, but Vermont companies or small businesses who were not able to access this so-called PPP small business program. Some of them couldn't get access to money because it had been sucked up by companies like Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, which is a big chain restaurant all across the country. I don't think there's any in Vermont. So we got our message across that we wanted the congressman to go back to Washington and let his peers know that the state of Vermont, just like many other states, needs a lot more flexibility and more resources so that we can meet people's needs quickly. It was quite distressing at the governor's press conference today, where he said that the unemployment rate in Vermont, which had hovered around 2% for the last bunch of years, is, as of just the last month, up to about 20 to 23%, which is just almost unimaginable. If you had told me that 2 months ago, I would have never believed that we would go from 2% to 23% so fast. So today I'm going to spend our time talking about modifications the governor has made to his stay-at-home orders. Obviously, the whole what we call a shutdown is really, it was a stay safe, stay home order from Governor Scott, which curtailed the vast majority of economic activity in the state. There have been some loosenings in recent weeks. Last Friday, operations of 2 or fewer who work outside were allowed to resume activities. So landscapers maybe, or people who work on exterior building renovations or painting, things like that. Today, the governor made the decision to open things up a little bit more. And I have spoken to the governor directly, and so I would never put words in another person's mouth, let alone the governor. But I think he's been clear that, and I think many of us in the legislature agree, that every time we gently ease economic activity restrictions, we have to do it with an eye towards public health and making sure we're not doing things that will put people more at risk, which would just mean that we have to go right back to where we started with more draconian measures. So I'm going to lay out a number of the steps that were outlined today. All of these go into effect on Monday, the 27th, and happy to answer questions if you email them to me after I conclude today. So I'm going to take about between 5 and 10 minutes to explain what the governor announced today, so that some of you will have some predictability either in your own work lives or just so you know what will be allowed and not allowed. The first part of today's order was to allow certain outdoor businesses to have up to 5-person work crews or number of employees on at a particular location. So that might include construction operations that are conducted outside. It might mean recreation maintenance. So if you're, let's say you're a construction company, you have 4 projects that you're working on, up to 5 people could be at each site, but no more than 5 at any one site. Construction operations outside is fairly straightforward to imagine. That could be a road crew. It could be outside work on a physical structure. Recreation maintenance is a little less obvious, but that could include groundskeeping at golf courses. It could mean some kinds of trail maintenance or other preparation for the moment we're able to utilize our recreational resources again. Manufacturing and distribution businesses and interior construction of uninhabited buildings also are now allowed to resume with up to 5 people in the particular space. So manufacturing and distribution is pretty straightforward, although it also the term manufacturing includes not just physical stuff like clothing or gadgets, but also could include food production and even beer making, things like that, which sometimes fall under the manufacturing heading. Interior construction, but only of uninhabited buildings, but still have to be less than 5 and still have to maintain, and it's a requirement that 6 feet distance be provided. So if you have a tight, small workspace that normally has 5 people and everyone is basically shoulder to shoulder, that is not being permitted. You have to be able to maintain 6 feet of distance at all times in order to be able to use this new up to 5 indoor allowance. Next, this is another one which at first, if you read the governor's order, it's not immediately obvious, but outdoor retail space also permitted to move forward with up to 10 people. Now, what is outdoor retail space? It's not like we have bazaars like you see in some other countries. Outdoor retail space is really meaning things like garden centers and greenhouses, places where people pick up, plantings, lawn care, all that stuff. That has been closed off even at the big box stores for the last month or so. Now, in-person shopping in those open air garden centers and greenhouses can be done with up to 10 people, but again, with the social distancing in place and an encouragement that there be as much cross vent if you're in a greenhouse as possible. So there is some additional guidance. Farmers markets, I've received comments from people about how is it possible that the governor was allowing gun sales curbside, but not vegetable sales curbside through farmers markets with slight reconfigurations. I agreed with that. I had pressed for several weeks to allow the safe reopening of farmers markets, even if it looks different, pre-ordering, for instance, and being able to pick up one bag when you show up. Effective May 1, which I believe is a week from tomorrow, so next Saturday, farmers markets can open with a couple conditions. One, they have to follow particular safety guidelines. It will not be the way it is typically, where people are socializing and mingling and bumping into one another. It will be the opportunity for farmers to come together and sell in more sort of transactional ways rather than in the social ways that we have come to really experience our farmers markets. The other thing is the local municipality has to authorize the opening of the farmers market. So if a community says, no, we're not going for it, it's too soon, or we don't think it can be conducted safely because of traffic flows or whatever it is, communities have to authorize it to go forward. I'm sure most will, but I think that's good news for many people, and it corrects something that didn't quite sit right with many of us, that they weren't open before. All of these permissions, which I've just described, come with a number of details that I won't bore you with, but one is that break rooms and on-site cafeterias, all the kind of common areas that are customary of some of the larger workplaces, all have to be closed. Everything but the bathrooms basically have to be closed, and the direct workspace. The other caveat, because some people might say, oh, well, this allows me and 2 other people to go back to work as normal. There is a requirement that employers must use remote work whenever possible. So if there is a task that someone can perform away from the workplace and can be done safely at home and at the same level of quality, that person must do it at home and not at the workplace. So it's important for people, especially as we try to keep the progress we're making to suppress this virus, to understand that this is not meant to be a green light to go back to the way things were before the stay-at-home order. This is still a time where we have to be very careful and not exceed the safe thing to do. Another one is, I think some libraries might have been doing this in the early day. The governor has now allowed libraries to do curbside book pickup, books and other materials. The libraries will have to have some process to make sure they're sanitizing what they're handling. But I think that's good news for many people, especially people who have kids who are at home and desperate for things to keep kids busy. So curbside library pickup now permitted. Also, outdoor recreation is not open. So golf courses not open, parks not open in general. However, maintenance and prep work can be done for outdoor recreation activities. That might include fixing up trails in advance of reopening trail networks and allowing hikers back in. For marinas, it might mean putting the docks in the water, cleaning, painting, all the things that have to happen at the beginning of the season can be allowed. Landscaping that's associated with outdoor recreation. Also cleaning, so particularly for water-based activities, getting buildings ready, all the ancillary stuff that has to be in place that supports outdoor recreation. All still with the limitation of the number of people who can be on site of 5, and still the requirement of social distancing every step of the way. One other thing, I had heard from some constituents who were concerned that people in some workplaces were not wearing masks. All people in essential jobs, that's still the term we're using for those who are at work, must wear face coverings. That is not a may wear face coverings, it is a must wear face covering. So if people are at essential workplaces right now and you know that they have either been told they are not to wear them or have been discouraged or are just plain not wearing them, the governor's order is very clear. They must wear them. So let me know if you know of any instances where someone needs to communicate better with either an employer or a set of employees. Ultimately, our goal is not to order people around, it's to keep people alive. So some people might not understand the importance of protecting people from one another with face coverings. The last thing I'm going to mention, this is it's a bit off the topic of today's modifications to the executive order, but it's good news. Good news earned the hard way. So obviously, as people are staying at home, either working remotely or out of work, or are just staying put to stay safe, people are barely driving. The amount of vehicle traffic has been measured by our agency of transportation. It is far less than even in the middle of some of our worst snowstorms each winter. That's a testament to people following the guidance that we've received from public health officials. It also means that fewer people will get in accidents, and our auto insurance policies, we pay based on the expected number of accidents and claims. And so some of us were prepared to offer legislation to require auto insurance companies to send refunds or find some other way to discount Vermont drivers who have, all of whom have auto insurance policies. Well, the good news is we did not have to pass legislation to do that. The auto insurers, I think, realized it was better to do it voluntarily than to be forced to do it by law, and have stepped forward with proposals to the state's Department of Financial Regulation, which oversees insurance, to voluntarily find ways to credit back customer bills, either in a direct check, reduction in next year's rates, or reduction in a subsequent bill that you might have to pay. 90% of covered Vermont drivers have an insurer who has voluntarily come forward with such a plan. I'll be speaking on Monday with the Commissioner of Financial Regulation to figure out who the heck the other 10% are, because if they don't join their pals, we'll make them do it. The good news is that's $14.6 million, which will go back in the pockets of Vermonters who right now desperately need the money. So it's good news. And Mike Pichak, who is the Commissioner of Financial Regulation, does a good job in general. I'm glad he was at the helm to help make that happen. And we'll close the gap so that 100% of Vermont drivers are getting the refunds that they deserve. And we'll see if there are other insurances that people pay that ought to go down as a result of changed activity. So final word, I often express gratitude to people who are on the front lines during these updates. I received a gift, actually, flowers from Jay and Caroline, thanking me for doing these updates. So Jay and Caroline, I just want to thank you for the gift, which was unnecessary, but much appreciated. I do these updates because it helps me communicate what I've picked up on all day. It helps me, I think, educate people who are picking up bits of information but might benefit from just one direct unleashing of info at 5:30. And I'll keep doing it as long as they're helpful and while we're in this crisis. And so, Jay and Caroline, thanks for the gift. As I say, unneeded, but totally appreciated. So I hope everyone continues to stay safe, and I'll see you Monday evening.